Rate of Rise, brought to you by Keys to the Shop. Today we're talking about challenging the status quo with David Lalonde of Rabbit Hole Roasters in Montreal. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Rate of Rise series here at Keys to the Shop, where we bring you elevated conversations on roasting. Today's episode is brought to you by Roast Magazine, which is one of the longest running and most respected trade journals in the industry. They are not only responsible for producing their amazing magazine, both online and in print, but they also publish a ton of books, including books on green coffee, of course, on roasting and beyond. RoastMagazine.com is where you need to go to learn more about Roast Magazine. Get subscribed today. The content of Roast Magazine curates really relevant content from subject matter experts, scientists, entrepreneurs, and professionals all over the global coffee roasting community. Is truly a gem of a resource. And so again, go to roastmagazine.com to get subscribed today. If you're a roaster, if you're thinking about getting into roasting, this should already be a thing for you. Really appreciate the folks there, and I know you will too. Again, check them out over at roastmagazine.com. Okay, everyone. Well, I'm really excited to present this conversation today. We are talking with David Lalonde, who is the co-founder of Rabbit Hole Roasters in Montreal, Quebec. They are the winner of Roast Magazine's Coffee Roaster of the Year award for 2023. And roasting tasty coffee is very important to David. But it's challenging the status quo in coffee that really drives him. Learning about coffee's inequities, building long-lasting relationships at origin, and centering smallholder farmers. Through Rabbit Hole Roasters, he hopes to change the narrative to one that is not based primarily on cup score. And in today's conversation with David, we get to dive into the history of Rabbit Hole Roasters. We talk about how David get into coffee from a hospitality background and what is behind his desire to change the status quo, to challenge the status quo, to really use the platform of Rabbit Hole Roasters the way that he has been, both in the way that coffee is presented and roasted and sourced, and how, as a roaster, he and his business partner, Sophie, tend to the sustainability and longevity of the business while seeking to make progress and change in the underlying issues of the coffee industry. David has a lot of energy and integrity for this cause, and I truly hope you feel inspired by David and how he describes the operation and values of the business and what it takes to operate a roastery with the courage of your convictions. And so really thankful to have David on the show. Truly great conversation. Let's get right to it. Here now is my interview with the co-founder of Rabbit Hole Roasters in Montreal, Quebec, David Lalonde. All right, David, welcome to Keys to the Shop. I really am glad to have you on the show today. How's it going?
Everything is going pretty well. It's a Friday, beautiful weather, drinking good coffee. So thanks for the invite. I'm always eager to talk about coffee all the time.
I know that there's a ton of mission and values that drive what you do. And, this is part of the reason why you won Micro Roaster of the Year from Roast Magazine recently. So congratulations on that.
Thank you so much. It was a really great way to end the year last year when we were announced as the 2023 winner in the micro category. We were finalists the year prior. So we really had to just sit back and just say, like, what can we do better in terms of roasting or in terms of our ethos? And we won the second time we applied, and it did wonders for us, showed the world what we were all about, and I'm super grateful, yeah.
That's awesome. So now let's talk a little bit about how you got into this world of coffee roasting. Your business is 4 years old, but you've been in coffee and actually in customer-facing food service for quite a while. So I'm interested to hear the story of how you got into the coffee industry and what really sparked your interest to dive headlong into roasting in particular.
So yeah, like you said, I was in the restaurant industry and the bar scene when I was even a little bit younger. So I've always been accustomed to participating in creating menus, into drinking and tasting a lot of different things. And I've always been passionate about that, even when I'm at home, just trying some recipes. But then I needed a break from working customer service, so I went for a trip that was supposed to be 6 months at a time where there was almost no specialty coffee really in Montreal. When I came back from that trip that was supposed to be 6 months, we were 3 years later about. So the scene had literally exploded, and I had like a coffee friend that just took me to all of those places where I could taste the sidamos that tasted like blueberries and the super sweet coffee, lighter coffee than I was accustomed to. And I just knew that I had to be part of that because restaurant world can only do so much, maybe just for me, but I think I'm not alone in this. But like the night shifts and the lifestyle is not necessarily something that you can pursue if you want to start a family or like settle down a little bit. So coffee seemed like a more viable option, at least at first in terms of scheduling, right? So yeah, I just applied to the cafe that I was going literally like 6 days a week. And after 2 or 3 months, he had an opening, hired me, and it just took off from there. Yeah.
So you got into roasting, you got into that end of the business. And I'm wondering, what was it about that in particular? You mentioned that you liked creating things, coming up with recipes, and that type of thing. And it seems like this was a stable, good fit for you, and that you were able to sort of hone that part of what you already had as a strength of your personality. But tell us a little bit about your experience in becoming a roaster versus working in a coffee shop, and how you just decided that that was the long-term pursuit.
What was really interesting to me about roasting is that it was a world that I didn't really have access to. There was a lot less information back then, but the coffee world was also just starting. So starting in a cafe was the logical way to go about it. But if I could compare this to maybe being a waiter versus being in the kitchen, I'm not saying that one is more important than the other, but I'm saying that there's only so much that you can do when you answer to customers, when the coffee is already dialed in, when the menu is set by the owner, right? So I found this fun and I learned a lot in the first year where I was only a barista. But I knew I wanted to go behind the scene and see, oh, so this coffee tastes like this and the other coffee tastes like that. Why is it? Is it just the origin? Is it just the processing? Is it just the roasting? And I honestly didn't know anything about coffee roasting, and I knew even less about coffee origin and how farming impact the cups, and then the social issues that farmers are facing. So working for a roaster, because I knew that they would roast coffee, but I knew they also had to buy the coffee. And that was just a fascinating world because I needed change in my professional life, and being a barista was a little bit too close to being a waiter for me. So that behind the scene was very, very interesting for me to explore. And the more I worked with the local roaster I first started with, and then I worked for another roaster in another city, and tasting roasters from across the world. I just ordered so much coffee the first 3 years that I was in the that I'd started my career there. It was just really fun to taste all those things, but I found that everything, the stories behind it, every coffee were pretty much always similar. There was not also a lot of diversity in terms of origin or processing. And mostly one thing that struck me really, just especially a little bit later before I considered starting my own roastery, is that I couldn't get access to any financial information from the roasters that I was working with. I didn't really know what the issues were about, like coffee farmers were facing, and it just looked a little bit too glorified or glamorized, if you will. And I just wanted to know more, and I couldn't get the answers that I wanted from the roasters that hired me. So I was like, maybe it's time that I dig deeper and kind of do my own project.
Was that always some kind of a bent that you had to kind of investigate beyond the culinary and the craft aspect? It sounds like the social element of what you were doing was also a value that you brought to your work.
I was always curious about people and their conditions, and I've traveled during those 3 years. I traveled to probably close to 40 countries, and I've seen lots of different cultures, lots of different type of social issues. Coming from the restaurant industry, where it was more local ingredients and sometimes alcohol or wines, I never dug really deep because wine producers are usually well off, and local farmers are usually a little bit more well off than coffee farmers, right? So, in my professional life, it's really when I started to work into coffee that I started paying attention more to equality, also quality of life for the people who would produce the ingredients or like the product, the raw material that I would need to start a roastery. But I was always like that in my personal life. When I traveled, I tried to read as much as I can about the history, but not just the mainstream history, also the just more history that they don't teach you in school. So I was always investigative like that in my personal life, and it was really fun to start in coffee because I could join this more like a private passion, and I could bring this into my work and investigate some more. So coffee was a very good fit, at least from to match my personal interest.
Where did you start to see the intersection of your craft and the cause of coffee? Where, a lot of what we do in coffee is we want to honor the work of those who have grown the coffee by doing a great job with the coffee itself. Not everybody does as good of a job as others. And as you are learning to roast and learning, about the origins and their inherent potentials, how did you interpret, or what was the framework that you used to really drive your pursuit of excellence in the craft of roasting related to that desire to do well according to the farmers themselves?
I think I took kind of a two-way approach to this because I had a lot of tasting experience before starting Rabbit Hole, and I had helped some roastery buy some green coffee as well, but I had absolutely never roasted, and I'd never started a business that would be as challenging as Rabbit Hole. So I'd say for the first 6 months, I really focused on let's start a solid business financially, and also let's learn how to roast tasty coffee. So I would say that for the first 6 months, I wasn't seeking to maybe be as vocal about what was happening at Origin, just because I know that if I wanted people to listen to me, first, I had to stay in business. And second of all, I had to roast tasty coffee. These are the two prerequisites so that people would listen to you. Because if you start roasting kind of worse coffee, or if the quality dipped, then people stop to listening to what you're saying a little bit. But it's when you can bring that quality, then people start listening. And I think it starts there, but I think it needs to evolve quickly. And after I was like, okay, I think I can somewhat roast on autopilot, and I don't have to worry about losing that many wholesale customers, or like our whole online store is doing okay. Then I would really dive deeper, and I would have those sometimes uncomfortable but essential conversation with the people that I dealt with the most, which is importers.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about kind of level of competency and excellence in what you're doing. People trust you with the quality, you're a stable business, but now you have these conversations. Obviously, you're going to predict that there's going to be some resistance, but that was always a thing that you knew would happen. But talk a little bit about what happened when you started to introduce more of the social angle and the conversations along with the coffee that you are roasting.
So for the first 6 months, maybe for the first 10 months even, I was working with a lot of different import companies because I was seeking to explore different origin, different processing methods, and I had no real relationship with any importers. So I was just wanting to meet as many of them as possible, order small quantities of coffee, see how they would treat me, see how they would act, even with the fact that I was a small account, but I was asking a lot of questions, right? And then when I was really comfortable roasting, I started to ask more questions about where is the coffee coming from precisely, what community, how did you pay for the coffee? And sometimes they would have, for example, like a, let's just say like an 85 point coffee, right? And in one origin, they would have paid that amount of money, and in another origin, it was the same or it was different. And I wanted to learn more about how they buy coffee more locally. And I was just basically using my gut feeling at first because everything had to be virtual, We started just like a year before COVID. So after that, like I could never go to coffee expos or stuff like that. So I really had to trust the conversations, the email, and like the FaceTimes that I would have with people just to see if it was a good fit, right? So once quality was established, all of those importers that I worked with early on gave me excellent samples, and I loved all of those coffees, right? So I think it's getting easier to get access to great coffee, right? So what's the next step? It's just asking more question about, was this coffee well paid in the market for those farmers, right? And I started to ask a lot of very precise question about different region of certain countries, farm gate price, and I would just see how those importers would react, right? And some didn't even have access to some information, or they chose not to talk about that. Some people would say other things, and I just felt that like our values were not matching. And then from a pool of, I'd say, maybe like 12 importers, then today I probably work really a lot with maybe four, maybe five. So it just was connecting with values. And I'm not saying that those other importers are actively looking to not pay more for coffee. It's not what I'm saying, but at the end of the day, I cannot buy from everyone. So just on an individual level with those importers, when I felt comfortable, and mostly when they welcomed my question, that was a great step. But when they had an answer ready for me right there in front of them without having to, oh, let me ask my partners in this country, I'll see what I can do about it, and those types of answers, right? So the more available information they had to give me when I asked the question, I knew that they were doing their work according to what I believe coffee should be, instead of just like looking for the answers of the questions I was asking them just because I asked them, but otherwise they would have had no interest to dive deeper in those types of topics.
What is it that coffee should be according to you, and what are those values? Could you describe those?
I think that it has to start with centering or recentering origin and the farmers, because yeah, obviously equality is across the board. There are a lot of issues with baristas not getting paid enough, different types of opportunities here at home for different types of people, but it all starts at origin. And if we don't pay more for coffee, then we're going to have less and less coffee available. We just have to start with the people who take care of the product that we absolutely need to have our business running, whether it's a roastery, import company, a cafe, or even the people at home, right? If there's no farmers, literally there's no coffee. So it has to start there. And I think that for a long time, because a lot of the system in place to buy coffee are remnants of colonial system and of colonialism, and we keep perpetuating those systems, maybe a little bit less in specialty coffee, but if we talk about the big companies that are managing those huge amount of money, right, and of green coffee. So I think that this is the step to go, and I think that the best thing that we can do is just to buy the same coffees from the same farmer year after year, even if there are fluctuations in quality or in profiles, because this gives farmer stability. And then obviously with that stability and like the taste profile established between the two parties, or the three parties, even roasters, importers, and farmers, I think that then we talk about price, we try to increase volume. But I guess that the main value that I have when I buy coffee is, how can I buy more from the same producers I'm already buying for? How can I pay more for that coffee? And how can I give them more security, both in terms of high prices and of volume, instead of always looking for the best coffees? And the best example that I can give about that is, if you have a coffee company that never has the same coffee year over year, they always keep changing. Usually it means that they are seeking just like quality. And of course, we all want to drink tasty coffees, but I think that it has to be beyond that a little bit. And that quality obviously is very, very important, but it cannot be the main factor when we take decisions about what coffees to buy and about how we should pay for those coffees.
Right. So, offering a variety of different types of coffees to your guests, because your guests are and your customers as a roaster are going to have many different people that they're serving, right? There's blends, there's levels of roast and different origins. I've been to your website. You've got a good variety from well-developed coffees in the roast to medium to light to really high end and very small amounts of origins like things from China or Yemen. But the majority of your menu seems to be those coffees that what you're saying is people that you can order from over and over again. So it seems like there is some room for those smaller purchases. But what I hear you saying is that it might be a warning sign if like the whole menu is churning over year after year. It may be a sign that there's less dedication to continuing that relationship with a farmer and more of a dedication to just hunting different coffees in small amounts that doesn't really create much momentum for the farmer.
That's exactly right. And sometimes I see roasters proudly posting that they just received 72 different samples from 6 origins, right? And yeah, it's fun to taste all of those coffees, and there's nothing wrong about that. But the thing is that now you're basically telling the people you bought from the year before, you're competing against so many people right now, and I will just buy the coffee that is going to be higher scoring, for example, or maybe it's going to be the coffee that I can get for the cheapest amount of money. And I personally don't think that this is the best way to go, because quality can only take us so far. And after that, the farmers need stability and continuity in terms of those relationships that they have with importers and that they have with roasters. And that's another big point about importers that I forgot to mention earlier. But I've also worked with importers that could never guarantee me that I would have access to the same coffee year after year, which also tells me that they were also seeking quality above everything else, above their own relationship with the farmers that they used to buy from. And I just think that it's doing the whole specialty coffee a disservice if we take this more long term.
Well, people would maybe push against that and say by focusing on quality, we're raising the level of all coffees. And maybe there's some credence to that in the idea that the experimental coffees and the media, the way it is now, people see that and they're more likely to innovate to, fight climate change with different, origins and with different types of plants they're planting and things like that. So there's this one argument that would say, well, by focusing on quality, we're actually doing everyone in coffee a service. But then I hear and I would lean toward what you're saying, which is there's like this plateau of quality that's not going to be the end of your business necessarily. That it seems like you're saying we should innovate in relationship once we reach a certain level of quality, or else the pursuit of quality actually won't mean much.
Yeah, this is exactly the way that I view things too. And I think that it's a lot easier now to find tasty coffee than it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And I do think that we are maybe just stuck in some systems that we just need to have evolve, or that we just need to change. Because if we go back to, let's just say, 1998, early 2000s, right? Even when you wanted to find quality coffee, sometimes you just couldn't. You would ask importers, and sometimes they would just have coffee that would have a grade on them, but sometimes importers could not even tell you where the coffee was coming from. They didn't even know the origin. So when the specialty coffee movement took form, I think that offering super super high quality compared to, let's say, the second wave of coffee, it was crucial and essential. And it's this differentiation in quality levels that makes what specialty coffee is today. So I don't want to downplay the role of quality here, like, at all. What I'm saying is that nowadays it's really easy to find good tasty coffee. Forget about where it's coming from, or just to find good coffee is not that hard. So once this has been established, where, okay, anyone can basically find decent coffee that scores above 84 points, then what's the next step? That's always the question that I'm asking now. We just need, I think, to evolve and say, like, okay, quality is still important, but quality is also easier to achieve. So what can we do now to make the specialty industry even more, if we want to say, special? And I think that quality took us to where we are today, but now we need to switch the narrative. Because also, there's a thing about improving quality at the farm level. It sounds easy, but in the current economic landscape of coffee farming, it is not that clear cut. And I hear people say all the time, oh, farmers should reinvest in their farms, farmers should do this, this, and that. But my question to those people is, with what money can they improve the quality if we're not willing to pay more and have long-term relationship with those coffee farmer? So basically, the people having extremely high quality right now, getting paid more because of that quality, then of course they can innovate. They can take a small portion of their farm to experiment, even if that experimentation fail. But you get some smallholder farmers where they just like, they cannot afford to lose 10% of their crop or 5% of their crop because they need all of it just to send their kids to school or to buy the bare minimum. And it's just like a survival price sometimes that we pay, even if we pay more for that coffee. So I think that if we just focus on quality, then it's just going to be the stable farmer that are making money right now are going to get even more well off. And then the smallholder farmers are going to suffer because of it.
Talk to us a little bit about how you as a roaster and what you choose to market to your customers and the way you choose to market it through blends and packaging. And you have a box experience like the series experience and subscriptions. These are all levers that we can use and pull to create demand that allows for stability in purchasing, especially if you're dedicated, like you're saying, we should be, to longer term relationships with farmers at specific origins. How have you approached this in the lineup of coffees that you sell, and how have you found that to be effective in providing a constant demand that allows you to make good on these values?
I think that to honor the values behind Rabbit Hole, we wanted to cater to a lot of people that sometimes cannot find the coffees that they like to drink in their daily lives, but they do want to support a better product. So that's why I've always tried to have light roast, sometimes extremely light, but just light roast. I wanted to have a bunch of medium roast, very approachable, but also dark roast and very dark for specialty coffee and more blends, because I think that one thing that could help us put those values even more in place is if we can reach more people. Because we talk about specialty coffee sometimes in the coffee world, and I'm guilty of this myself, is that when I talk about coffee, sometimes I forget about the rest of the world and I just think about specialty coffee. But specialty coffee is still maybe the drop in the bucket of what the entire coffee world is. So if we could just grow that pool of specialty drinker by offering more stable offerings, by having light to medium plus to dark to maybe super dark in the specialty coffee realm, I think we could have more people in that truly have a desire to do good with their money and that have the money to pay specialty coffee prices. But if you just love really dark coffee and specialty coffee roasters around you don't offer this, then this is kind of a problem. And in terms of coffee menu as a whole, it's perfectly fine to just have a coffee that you don't intend to buy the year after. You just tasted it, you fell in love with the coffee, and it's fine. And I do this too as a coffee buyer. Sometimes I have no intention of buying from, I don't know, a Mexican geisha. Someone sends me a sample, and I'm just like, that is such a good coffee, and I just want to have a little bit of it. And you create a buzz around that coffee, and sometimes those coffees will even help bring eyes on the other things that we're doing. So you have some people sometimes that are seeking those geisha coffee, which is fine, but then they come on our website and then they see the rest of the coffees that we have. So those super high quality coffee and the coffees that you don't buy year after year, they also serve a purpose. But I just think that a high percentage of your menu should be relationship based, solid, and that you buy the same year after year.
Okay, so I have a soft spot for developed coffees. You mentioned the year 1998. I mean, this is the year that I essentially discovered and decided about coffee, or like 99. So I have like steeped in this dark roasted, like nostalgic. And for even today, I will seek out great developed coffees. I'll probably order some from your website. But the point is that I am aware that that swing, the pendulum swing to the side of super light coffees, and some would argue underdeveloped, and there certainly has been a lot of that. Now we're correcting a little bit to these more developed in the blends, and hopefully, I think, a little less pretentious. And I'm curious what your perception of this is. Like, why are we afraid of opening up different categories of roast profiles to the public? Is it a holdover of our dedication to quality, or even just a really myopic interpretation of quality that's really holding us back from being effective in the ways we actually really need to be?
You're bringing really great points, and I think that specialty coffee, probably not everyone, but I would say more people than I would love to. Let me repeat that sentence. That was a terrible way to start my sentence. Since it's not live, I'm going to take advantage of that.
Sure.
I do think that most of the specialty coffee community have some sort of a problem with more developed coffees because there's still this notion that specialty coffee needs to be completely different than chains and the second wave and the first wave of coffee. So, like I said, it served us well early on to be completely different and separated from those first two movements. But now that we're here, it's time that we reach more people that want to move away from the chains. And I think that more developed coffee, maybe not charcoal coffee, but just more developed coffee could do really well for us. And I think that one of the thing that is holding us back the most, I think, is basing putting too much emphasis on cup score. And I'm not saying that it's entirely useless because I was a Q grader. I've decided to let it lapse. So I'm not a Q grader officially anymore. But cup score seems to rule so much. And the cupping sheets and the flavor wheels, they're always built for light roast. So when we think about those things that we use to buy coffee, to assess quality, they're all meant for lighter roast, sometimes a little bit more medium. But if you have a very solid dark roasted coffee, and you know that people are gonna brew this with automatic machine, with bad frothers, or like with milk and sugar, then of course that coffee that you roast for those people is not gonna score well, and it's not gonna be easy to talk about in a good light if all we have are like citrus fruits and stone fruits and like delicate chocolate tasting notes. And I think that the using cup score to define the specialty coffee industry as a whole, I think is also a major problem that we should rethink as an industry.
Sure. And that's a huge system that has been developed in a well meaning way to create consistency so that, all of this can sound like there's some insidious underlying desire to, exploit. However, it's maybe, and what picking up from all this is that the lack of urgency to evolve or be at least present in the moment to realize that these systems need to be updated. Just like I would tell a client, if you have a checklist for opening and closing and it's still the same as it was when you're 5 years old, that it was when you're in your first year, you're probably not getting everything. And so I think we need to like update the stuff that we use to reflect the present moment, and especially because so much is on the line. I want to ask you about the operational realities of running a business based on these values. I know it's probably not much different than any other roastery, but talk to us a little bit about how you maintain the day-to-day business and make sure that you're doing good by your values, but also making sure you're running a tight ship so that your company will be a stable entity that can be counted on by both your customers and the farmers that you represent.
That's an excellent question. And before I touch on that, I just want to come back to this clothing store example that you just gave because it's a good one. And I think also when it comes to more developed coffees or darker roast, is that if I talk about my experience, the way that I was taught to roast at this co-roasting space, all the notions and all the theory of roasting and the theory of cupping and tasting and Q grading, again, was all that information was about light roast. And the first few times that I was thinking, oh, I should have like a dark roast, to cater to those people. But the first few dark roasts that I did for like 2 3 months, they were horrible. They were literally just like there was nothing there, and I would not have blamed anyone for not wanting to drink those coffees, especially the specialty coffee people that I was trying to convince that we need to roast darker sometimes. And I think that also the lack of information about how to roast a good dark roast is something that is holding us back. So, like you said, with the clothing store example, if you have the same clothes from 5 years ago and you're selling it today, you're not going to sell as many, or people are not going to want them. So that was a great example. And now to come back to the actual question, which is how do our values how can we enact our values but also run a tight ship business wise? And this is something that I probably sit down every single day to figure this out. But at the end of the day, of course, we still need to make money. We still need to be profitable because otherwise there's no more rabbit hole and we buy zero coffee from those farmers we've been buying from. So we do need to be profitable. But I think that it has to come also to a decision that I'm not going to become a millionaire because of that stuff. And we just need to accept that we are sacrificing some money here so that we can pay more for coffee. And of course, we also need a living wage, and baristas need a living wage, and we need to do good at home as well. But I think it's also a conscious decision to say, you know what, we need more money to enact on, not to enact, but to act on those values. So we reinvest probably like a bigger chunk of the money that we could pay ourselves into paying more for certain coffees. And again, it's trial and error. There are some quarters where we're just like, that was a rough one. But overall, if we take this, we can still pay ourselves. And it's a good experiment to see like we can both live, Sophie and I, my business partner, and we can also pay more money for those coffees, if that answers the question.
Yeah, it certainly does. I also am curious about the moments of decision where you do have, as a roaster, especially as an award-winning roaster, there's a lot of opportunities presented to you to do certain things. You're saying, we want to reinvest that into the company. Some people will reinvest that in a way not directly to paying more for coffees, for example. They might reinvest it into equipment to get greater capacity to roast more coffee, or they might set up a program that allows them to do more for the relationships that at origin that they already have. But there's sort of a delayed gratification there where there's the investment and then the payoff is a few years away potentially. How do you approach those opportunities and know what the right investments are that aren't immediately, let's say, like, giving more money to the farmer, but they do result in your business being able to have greater capacity to serve?
One of the things that is really helping us, but that we can also do better, is it all comes down with the messaging, right? Because the way that I want to trust the importers that I work with because they provide me with that information, then I would gladly pay more for coffee and I would pay farmers more. And I feel confident that the money is going to be used for what the importers are telling me is going to be used for. So as roasters, then we have to become very good communicator to communicate that to consumers who are bombarded with images of farmers, of people saying that they're doing so good for the farmers, even though they might be cutting some corners and whatnot. So it has to come with the messaging a lot, and probably like educating and building that trust, because you want to increase the price that you pay to the farmers, and it's great, but it also means that we have to increase the price that we sell to the customers, right? So I think that we just have to balance those things out. And you mentioned equipment. So for example, we just bought an automatic bagger. So we used to bag everything by hand, and that was very long and very tedious, especially after winning Micro Roaster of the Year. We had a big bump in orders, so that was quite something. But now that the machine is set up, so for example, this was probably about $10,000 Canadian for the machine, and that was an investment that we absolutely had to make, just for our sanity, just for our workflow, right? But besides those big things that you buy every 3 years, for example, it just have to be like, okay, so we got to communicate better because we need people to pay more for coffee. So we need to give them tasty coffee, but we need to give them more information. And you mentioned Roaster of the Year, and that was a big platform for us because we spoke our mind during the interview, and this article was very much more about our values, what we believe in, as opposed to not just like the tasting of our coffee. And I really want to use this opportunity to, because we have this kind of credibility now, right? That we won this award. So I want to use this as a platform to explain what are the conditions at origin, and also why we have to charge more for coffee. And one of the best examples that I can give about that is for one particular dark roast that's called the Black Forest. 3 years ago, we had a coffee from Yunnan, and the market at that point for those coffees, the farmers were well paid. It was about, for us, it was about $2.90 for the coffee. Then we had logistical, especially during COVID, coffees from China was crazy. We had to switch origin for this particular blend. And then we started to buy this other coffee from Mexico, but then it was at 380, so $1 more for the same coffee. So of course we had to increase the prices. But then working with the importers we worked with, I knew why the coffee was more expensive. It was the market, but it was also the fertilizers, it was the shipping costs. Then the same thing happened, and now we switched again for this particular dark roast. But now the coffee is gonna approach for the next cycle of contracts that I signed, but the coffee has not been delivered. Now for the same coffee, we're going to be around about 480 per pound USD for the same coffee. So in the span of 3 harvests, we went from 280 to 370 to 480 or something like that. So there are reasons behind that, and we do have to increase our prices, but we have to communicate the reasons behind this. So I think in the end, it just comes about building trust with the people who are going to buy their product, because they are also essential and they deserve to know.
I like that. Yeah. And there's a lot of realities that don't get seen behind the scenes in roasting and in coffee shops. These expenses that, creep up on you. And the example you gave is perfect, because that's just different contexts, and, the changing of the price needs to have a direct impact on what you charge. But then there's what you do beyond that that makes its way to the farmer. And so there's a lot to consider, more than just the marketing and the pamphlets. And it could be easy from the outside to say, oh, well, a coffee shop is opening another coffee shop, and so they could have, done something different. We don't necessarily know the reality of that particular business. It might be absolutely necessary, and in the hands of the right operators with the courage of their convictions, expansion or reinvestment into the business is an opportunity for everybody connected to that business, and not always this like bid for more money for the owners. Because as a business owner, you're in the crosshairs. You're like guilty before being proven innocent, because you own this business and you're probably going to screw people over. So that's got to be a hard thing while holding these values and knowing the integrity of your convictions. I'm sure that you deal somewhat with that skepticism as well.
100%, but I'm more of the thinking that, when they say innocent until proven guilty, I think that when it comes to business, there were so people who took advantage of systems that benefited them, that I think it's kind of okay that people have this skepticism when cafe owners or roasters or in any other industries as well, when they open that other shop, or that they buy this newer machine or bigger roasters and all that stuff. And it's okay. So it always comes down to the messaging and building that trust with the people. And the longer you do this with your customer, then the more easily they're gonna be trusting you. And also, you mentioned opening more cafes. And sometimes it serves a purpose, and sometimes it goes against what I believe in, because I know some roasters who open cafes left and right, but it's purely just about margins. And I know this because I send them our price list, and they're just like, ciao, bye. I can't make my money with you because you charge too much for coffee, right? But then you have those other people that open 2, 3, or 4 coffee shop, whether they're roasters or not. And they truly do this because they just want to, if they don't roast, they just want to buy more from ethical roasters to promote those products. And if they do roast, opening another cafe means creating volume for you. And if you can buy, for example, from this one farmer, he's got 50 bags a year, but you can only buy 25. Maybe by opening this other shop, you can buy the full lot. So it's always different, the motive behind buying a machine or opening a cafe. And it comes down with building that image and that recognition, and people can trust what you are doing, and they would basically be happy to support your business with their money, because money in the end of the day is just a vote of confidence. Basically say, here you go, I'm voting with my money today, and I'm going to vote for Rabbit Hole or for this particular cafe that I think are doing great things.
Well said. Yeah. And we need people to vote more with their money for people who are doing more with their money. And
Absolutely, yes.
so the last question I really have here is about how to take the content of this conversation. Let's say if I'm a roaster who desires to pay more for coffee, to invest long term in relationships, to take on some of the things that you're giving an example of with Rabbit Hole, what would you say to that person that are the first steps so that they can start to invest real time and energy and change some systems in their shop or their roastery to create something more sustainable and more according to these values that you want to see more of in specialty coffee?
I think that, and I get a lot of people, especially since the micro roaster thing, just messaging, especially on Instagram. I spend way too much time there. And they ask me those type of questions about green buying. How could I buy this coffee differently? How could I be more involved? And first of all, it needs to come, unless those people can travel themselves, which is really hard. I think that really choosing the importers that you work with well is crucial. And also, what is crucial is that you have to ask those questions that you don't want to ask because you don't want to ruffle any feathers, right? But you do got to ask those questions. Also, people have to realize that this type of work, it sounds good and it is good, but it's also less margins. It's also pretty long. So to build meaningful relationship, that means a lot of emails, phone calls. It means sometimes less cash flow. So people need to be prepared for those types of things as well. And also, it's all about continuity and the longevity of the relationship that you are going to build that way. Because starting a relationship with an importer where everybody trusts everybody, it takes a long time, and there's going to be hurdles. So, for example, I work with Yunnan coffee traders for all of our coffees in China, and it used to come in the United States, but because of the trade war and the tariffs and everything, I had no coffee from China. No importer from the United States wanted to take on anything from China coffee wise. So I could have dropped it, right? But after talking with Yunnan Coffee Trader, finding an import partner in the UK, so we could figure out the contract and the samples and all that jazz, right? But it was a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails, and it also means paying more for the coffee and paying way more for the shipping because instead of coming from New Jersey, I have to order this from the UK now. You really need to be committed to those types of decision because it really sucks if you put 2 years of work, 3 years of work, 4 years of work, and then you have hurdles and you say, oh, I can't do this anymore, right? I think that people, when they dive into ethical coffee or sustainability or wanting to do more, they start and they want to overhaul their whole operation overnight, but it's not going to happen. The best advice I could say is start with one coffee, ideally with a coffee that you roast medium or that you put in blends that you can buy more of, because the more you buy of one particular coffee, then the more enticing it is for the importer to start having those conversations with you, as opposed to if you just buy one bag a year, all those questions and all that work for the importer might not seem worth it, right? So start slowly. Try to find one coffee that you want to have on your menu year after year. Having this coffee as a single origin and in some blends and as a darker roast is really, really helpful. And that's actually how we started this whole more like ethical coffee buying thing, maybe 10 months into Rabbit Hole, where we light Yunnan in a blend. We had a dark roast Yunnan, and we also had it as a single origin. And it took off from there, and we took that model and then we applied it to Guatemala, and then we applied it to Yemen. And it's a slow grind, but in the end, it's absolutely worth it because one, you know you're doing good, and two, there is enough money for everyone, and maybe you won't buy that Tesla, but you'll be able to be comfortable in your life.
I love that. Thank you so much, David. Well said. And I'm really grateful for all that you are doing with Rabbit Hole and for joining us here on the show. I appreciate your wisdom here. And I want to invite you to tell us where we can learn more about Rabbit Hole and get some coffee and just stay in touch.
Thanks a lot for the invite. I always love to talk about those things. And the best thing that people can do if they want to challenge the coffee status quo, basically, is just come browse our website. And we have a transparency report, brew chart, a lot of information about all of those coffee. The financials are all there for you to read. And also, just I'm the one managing all of the Instagram. So just anyone at any time can shoot me a DM, just ask me any question. There's zero gatekeeping. If you roast on a lowering and you want me to look at like a curve, I've done that for people in the past. Any question, I'm always happy to refer people to the importers that I work with. And yeah, so just people should just reach out all the time, and we should just be more open about sharing information in the coffee world, basically. So no gatekeeping over here. So for Instagram is going to be Rabbit Hole Roasters, the handle. And the website is rabbitholeroasters.com.
Awesome. Thank you, David, again. This was great to talk to you. A lot of great points made and some things I think are really going to make a difference. Again, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for the invite again, and thanks for listening.
Okay, everybody. Well, I hope that you enjoyed that conversation. There is a lot to reflect on. And, there's a lot of little steps that one can make to create pathways for sustained relationship with the people you're sourcing your coffee from. And if you go to Rabbit Hole Roasters website, you'll find that the website has a lot of options that create room for purchasing larger quantities of coffee repeatedly from the same producers to create that kind of a security in the relationship that ultimately is more likely to make a difference upstream in the coffee value stream. And I love that David's mind is constantly working to think about not only what's in front of him in terms of the coffee, obviously this is quality coffee, but beyond quality is the idea of fairness, is the idea of caring for others that are not only attached to this coffee, but depend on it to a degree that few of us could really fathom. Even though we can't exactly know, we need to innovate, we need to create and use our energies, I think as David and Sophie are doing at Rabbit Hole Roasters, to do what we can with what we have to address how things are so that we can create something better in the future and do it through tasty coffee. So a big thank you to David for joining me on the show. I really appreciate your time and wisdom, David. If you are interested in learning more about Rabbit Hole Roasters, all you need to do is go to their website, rabbitholeroasters.com. And they have a lot of coffees on their website to suit your palate. And I would encourage you to try some of those more developed coffees. Again, the website, rabbitholeroasters.com, and also on Instagram at rabbitholeroasters. Now, if you have any questions, comments, or feedback for me about today's episode or any of the episodes of this show, go ahead and send me an email. Chris@keystotheshop.com is where you can do that. And I always love hearing from listeners to Keys to the Shop. Again, that email is chris@keystotheshop.com. And with that, that is the end of the 20th in our series, Rate of Rise episodes. It's really been cool to do this series and really focus in on roasting stories, roasting science and craft with you all. I hope you're finding great value from these interviews. Don't forget to subscribe to Keys to the Shop. Follow Keys to the Shop on Instagram at Keys to the Shop. And of course, as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.